Okay, so congratulations, you successfully have begun our first little online lecture. We won't do too many of these throughout the year, I don't think, but uh, I did want to start off with one so that we can move a little faster through Unit 1. And I apologize for getting this up a little bit late. Thanks for your patience. In order to get the points for this online lecture, you're going to want to fill out these notes right here, and then also answer the questions on Edpuzzle as we go. Okay? And you can cross off this section right here, this bell ringer, because we're not going to be doing that today on this lecture. So our notes today are on the American Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment, you might remember a little bit from world history, was a time period whenever people were starting to use more logic and reason to make decisions, and that especially was involved in science and mathematics, but also in government. And in Europe, you didn't really have a choice what kind of government you had, but in America, a place that was experimenting, they're going to be paying attention and listening to these new ideas and this reason and logic being applied to how you run your government. So let's take a look. So the big idea today is that the Enlightenment ideas influenced the American colonies to shed British rule and create a new nation. So I'm going to I'll probably do this really fast, and you'll have to pause the video in order to fill in your notes, and that's okay. So, and then the main questions we're going to cover today are: what was the Enlightenment? Who were Enlightenment philosophers? And how did Enlightenment ideas contribute to the American Revolution and the idea of American democracy? And then I just have this kind of like vocab slide. Oops. Let me go back for a second. Okay, I have this vocab slide for you to fill in on your paper, just some important terminology from the Enlightenment time period. Enlighten means to shed light on truth or free from ignorance. Truth means how things are. Intellect is the power of the mind to understand through the use of reason. Reason is to explore the cause and effect of things. And revolution means a dramatic change in practices or beliefs. So you might remember some different revolutions from world history, like maybe the agricultural revolution or the industrial revolution, and now we have a kind of enlightenment, and it's going to be a revolution. So the time period here is the late 1700s and early 1800s, and it's happening in Europe and America. And actually, I think all of the philosophers we're going to talk about today are actually guys from Europe, and they're writing these ideas in books, and a lot of American brain people like Jefferson and Madison, these smart American guys, are reading the books, and they're getting ideas, and they're thinking, those ideas sound pretty good. So we're going to kind of go through some of the brains of this time. Oh, it's kind of it's a little bit cut off on your screen. This guy's John Locke. This is Montesquieu. This is Rousseau. This is Voltaire. And this is Beccaria. And we're going to go through each one of these guys. So, why was it called an intellectual revolution? Well, it was the age of reason. Before this, people maybe didn't use their brains so much. And for the first time since a long time before, since like Plato and Socrates in Rome in like the year 0, we're going to have reason play a much bigger role in people's thought processes. And this is going to challenge traditional authority. And it's going to encourage people to be individuals and have the ability to think for themselves. And it proved man's ability to reason and thus discover for himself truths. And the idea became that people's liberties should be protected by law. And again, let's go through... we kind of tied together the Enlightenment and the Scientific Revolution into the same kind of event, sort of, but the Scientific Revolution is kind of first, and the Enlightenment comes from it. And in the Scientific Revolution, it really had to do more with science and mathematics, and they learned through basically different experimentation that things could be learned through observation, reason, and logic. And the Enlightenment guys are going to be like, we can apply what those guys did to science, we can apply that to government and how people are treated. So just some famous people of the scientific revolution: Copernicus, and he identified with the heliocentric theory, which is the idea that the sun is the center of the earth. Before that, people did not believe the sun was the center. They believed the earth was the center. Do you remember what that was? That was the geocentric theory. Next up came Galileo, and he was a man who accomplished many different things, but mostly he perfected the telescope, and he observed a lot of phenomenons that are associated with modern astronomy. And then Isaac Newton, who you gotta love him. We credit him with creating calculus and the laws of. Discovered the laws of gravity. So these are important scientists. So back in America, our founding fathers like Madison, Jefferson, Washington, Adams, these guys are going to be influenced by Enlightenment ideas. And they're going to apply them to America's documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. In England, you have the king, King George III, ruling over the colonists from across the ocean. And one of my favorite people on earth is Benjamin Franklin. Of all the founding fathers, Franklin is most known for his scientific discoveries and inventions. He's kind of a cool dude. He proved that lightning was electricity, and he was a member of the Declaration of Independence Committee. He was just one of these guys that's good at everything. He's one of my heroes. If you look at the back of the room, you see his statue up on the bookshelf. And there's a lot of cool stories about him that are maybe inappropriate. You can ask me about later. And maybe there's even a video or two I can show you that are kind of funny. Alright, so when I say founding fathers, these are the guys I'm kind of talking about. John Adams, who was a member of the Declaration of Independence Committee, and he was the first vice president. He's kind of a jerk, but he's a pretty smart guy. Thomas Jefferson, who is the main author of the Declaration of Independence. He's our third president. There's Thomas Jefferson. George Washington, our first president. James Madison, the father of the Constitution. And Thomas Paine, who wrote a pamphlet called Common Sense that was inspired by the Enlightenment. So what we're going to do now is go through these Enlightenment philosophers in Europe and kind of break down why they matter and what they contributed. So John Locke is one. I want to believe you've been hearing his name since 8th grade. But John Locke, he believed in these things called natural rights. The idea that everybody is born, no matter who you are, rich or poor, with life, liberty, and property, no matter what. And you can see his influence on the Declaration of Independence because it says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now they changed that because I don't think they wanted everyone in America to be able to own property, but that's that. So according to Locke, people have the right to change or overthrow their government when it's not protecting their natural rights. So he would argue, if the king is not protecting your rights, then he doesn't deserve to be your king. And this guy, I feel like he's probably the most important influencer on the American colonists. Alright? So, little visual here. Locke's key idea was natural rights. When you think John Locke, I hope you have a little word association and you think natural rights. And I hope you know what those are, which are life, liberty, and property. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's correct. Okay, sorry. Alright, next up is Montesquieu. And Montesquieu, when I think of him, I think about separate branches of government. So he's a French guy, if you can't tell from his name. And he said that when you give all the power to one branch, like if you gave it all to a president, or if you gave it all to a Congress, then they're going to abuse that power. So you need to separate the powers and have them check and balance each other so that no one person or branch can control the government. And I think this is a really good idea. Even if you didn't have a president and you only had a Congress, you wouldn't want to put all the power in their hands. And so in America, we have 3 branches in our government. The president, the Congress, or the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Alright, so having all the power in one place is bad. Breaking it up into 3 places is good. Alright. So if you use his name and you pronounce it Montesquieu and you clap, then it'll remind you 3 branches. 1, 2, 3, 3 branches. Alright, another guy is Rousseau. And Rousseau believed in this thing called social contract. Can you write that on the side of your notes? Social contract? And that's the idea that people must give up some of their rights in exchange for protection from the government. So an example is you guys don't have like 100% rights, and neither do I. We both can't bring guns to school, for instance. But I think that's a good thing, right? Like, I'm willing to give up my right to bring a gun to school if that means that we all go to school in a safer place. So we give up some rights, the social contract, in exchange for the good of the group. That's kind of like democracy. Alright? So Rousseau said that the government should be formed by the will of les gens, which is the people. A little thing to help you remember. Like legend is kind of like Jean. Okay, that's dumb. That's stupid. I don't like that. Okay. Another guy is Beccaria. Beccaria was Italian, and when I think of him, I think of cruel and unusual punishment. He was against cruel and unusual punishment. He thought that the punishment should fit the crime, and that it should be fair, and that there should be no torture of anybody. So if you steal a loaf of bread, you shouldn't get 10 years in jail, and they shouldn't like break your fingers or something. So he said no torture, no death penalty, and that people who are accused of crimes have certain rights. And you can see his influence on the Constitution because we don't allow torture in America, and well, the death penalty. He might be against that, but we do have that in parts of the country. These are some torture devices from back in his days. Look at this stuff. If you did something bad, you'd be put in one of these for a couple days in the middle of town, and everyone would look at you. Or maybe they shut you in this little pointy mummy coffin. So you can use his name to think of it as cease brutality, so stop torturing people. Another guy, probably my favorite guy, is Voltaire, just because he's quite a character. Voltaire was a French philosopher, wrote a bunch of books, and when I think of him, I immediately think of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. This guy was like really sassy and sarcastic. He's got a lot of great quotes. He believed in freedom of speech and expression. He told the king, well, I can't say it. He told the king to go do something to himself, and then he got in trouble and went to jail, and he thought he shouldn't have to go to jail. He has one of my most favorite quotes. He says that, I believe, I don't necessarily agree with what you say, but I would fight for your right to say it. So, an example with Voltaire would be, now this is pretty controversial, but if the KKK went to the city of Riverside and said they wanted to do a march down Main Street in Riverside, according to American Constitution, they're entitled to be able to do that as long as they're not inciting violence. And of course, we all hate the KKK and think they're awful. But Voltaire would say, you know what? I can't stand them, but it's their right to have freedom of speech, and I don't get to just let the groups I like have freedom of speech. Everybody gets freedom of speech. So he's one of my favorite guys. So you can use his name as another way to remember. So you can use his name to think, very terrible to limit free speech. Voltaire, very terrible to limit free speech. That is so cheesy. Oh my god. Okay, so just to review, you got Locke, natural rights; Montesquieu, 3 branches; Rousseau, social contract, give up some rights; Beccaria, no more torture; Voltaire, freedom of speech. So how were these ideas implemented in the United States? Well, when Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, he drew upon the philosophy of natural rights. So John Locke had a big influence on the Declaration of Independence. I already talked about that earlier. The Constitution is based around the idea of democracy and the idea that power to make laws should be in the hands of the people. We have separation of powers here in America with 3 different branches. The First Amendment is where you can find Voltaire and freedom of speech. And in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, we outlaw torture with the 8th Amendment. So here is our summary. We have the scientific revolution led to Enlightenment ideas, which inspired the founding fathers, which is going to lead to revolution, and then they're going to write documents that are kind of inspired by those guys in Europe. Okay, that's it. Can you follow the directions down there on the summary? I want you to include those words that I mentioned. And we are done. I will see you in a couple days. Have a nice night.